Oh hey, welcome to Night City Chronicles Philosophy, where we discuss cyberpunk in both its games and beyond. And in fact, we're going to focus a little more on that beyond part today. You see, a lot of people know cyberpunk from the video game or the anime, or if you've been watching our channel, you now know cyberpunk as a tabletop role-playing game. But I think it's better to go back to the beginning of cyberpunk as a sci-fi genre. That's right. Cyberpunk itself is a full genre, not just an IP. So when we look into this, we could see the philosophies of cyberpunk and what that genre entails for something to be called cyberpunk, the influences, and how that shows up in both the tabletop role-playing game, the video games, and other media that you know and love. So first off, right, what is cyberpunk as a genre? Well, cyberpunk is a subcategory of sci-fi, specifically dystopian sci-fi. This means that this is a sci-fi world where things are not going, well, great. So in cyberpunk, the easiest way to describe it is low-life, high-tech. There's a lot of high technology like cybernetics, mega corporations, and things like that, but there's a big wage disparity between the haves and the have-nots. The cybernetics, the technological advances and things like that are held by those at the top, while the ones at the bottom are hard-pressed to get almost anything that they can get their hands on. If you've ever seen the movie Elysium with, I believe, Matt Damon, that's actually a great introduction to the cyberpunk genre. It's a little more sci-fi than you would think, but you have Elysium, the big satellite where all the rich people live and you can cure cancer with no problem, and then you have Earth, where everybody has to scrape, scrounge, and fight each other for just any little bit of resources, food, and technology. In fact, the exoskeleton in Elysium is part of the cybernetic process to get our main character as strong as the robots that the rich use to enforce the poor. As you can see, cyberpunk is about being punk, right? It's a sci-fi dystopic future with people who are rebelling against a broken system. And also, cyberpunk as a genre is usually supposed to be a warning to, well, hypercapitalism. It's the idea that back in the 80s and late 70s, that corporations were gaining a lot of power, Reaganomics was coming in and taking away a lot of regulations for corporations so that they could conglomerate and be bigger, and authors just looked at that and went, what if we turned it up to 11? Boom! Cyberpunk is born. Alright, so now we know cyberpunk generally as a genre. Specifically, it is a sci-fi dystopic future with themes of corporate overreach, human augmentation, individuality, what does it even mean to be human, wage disparity, and the characters are usually either rebelling against said system or just trying to live in said system, and what that does to them in either case. Some cyberpunk media that would help us explore these earmarks of the genre is for corporate overreach. RoboCop. I mean, come on. OCP is a private company that the police are now policing. Detroit has no longer had the government do this, but a private corporation instead. Yay! And then for something like wage disparity, again, the movie Elysium is a very good example of that one. Blade Runner is a really good example of the question of humanity. What does it mean to be human as technology starts to rise and become more like us? Human augmentation could be in something like Pantheon. It's a very, I don't know if this is a cyberpunk story, but the idea of human augmentation changing the human evolution, and we question what is and isn't human and consciousness. The show Pantheon is actually really good for that. I don't think that's a cyberpunk story, but it's cool sci-fi, and I kind of want you guys to go watch it. Everybody knows it for the Steve Jobs fighting like a superhero. It's a wild show. Please go watch it. It's very insightful. But from the wage disparity and how characters try to live and or rebel against that system, rebelling against the system is something like The Matrix. That is completely about rebelling against a actual system, and it is a huge influence on Cyberpunk. Of course, you have Neuromancer and Snow Crash, which also goes through the disparity of the rich and the poor and what that means to live through as an edge runner. Hell, the name Night City comes from, I believe, Neuromancer. So, there you go. As you can see, there's a lot that the cyberpunk genre can cover, right? Different themes, ideas, and philosophies. Now, we're going to get into, well, oh boy, the most dangerous part of this video. My own thoughts and philosophies of cyberpunk. Dear God, I'm not going to survive. Okay. So when I say my philosophies on cyberpunk, I just mean these are the core ideas and philosophies I go off of when writing cyberpunk stories or themes that I like to see in other cyberpunk stories as well. If this is me writing for my tabletop role-playing group, or me writing for a feature-length cyberpunk script, which somebody should totally read and give me notes. Cough, cough, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Sorry, that's I'm being silly. But yes, the core philosophies I always go off of for cyberpunk are thus: corporate individualism versus communal individualism. And we'll get into what that means in a second. Transhumanism versus naturalism. And then, of course, last but definitely not least, is, of course, the idea of humanity in general. What is the core sense of what makes us human? Basically, as you can see, these are conflicts. And these are the conflicts that I like to surround my stories around. So let's go with the big one that is wonky and weird, which is, of course, communal individualism versus corporate individualism. Communal individualism is something that I've observed from punk culture. Going to shows, going to clubs and things like that, and just living life the way I do. Individuals, completely different from one another, completely different views and takes on even punk culture, but they're all together within said culture, and they stick together as such. Corporate individualism is really defined as you are part of the power structure, but yet you are an individual because of said power structure. Meaning that in the cyberpunk world, corporations have more resources, allow you to have more technology, which allows you to modify yourself more than the average person. Therefore, you need less people. You are an island in an archipelago. You stand alone in a group. Meaning, like, no one needs to really protect me if I have bulletproof skin or bodyguards. Nobody has to tell me what's in the room across the way because I have eyes that can see through walls or anything like that. Or I have a voice box that hypnotizes you into doing what I say. I don't need to be charismatic or nice or communal in any sense. I can be corporate and an individual. So that's the conflict that I usually play around with in my stories, and something that I see in a lot of other cyberpunk media that really stuck out to me and is why I like cyberpunk as a genre. Next up is, of course, your transhumanism versus naturalism. There is a conflict between technology and nature in cyberpunk. Some people want to reject the new technologies and cybernetics and augmentations, others want to embrace it. In my opinion, I think this is a fantastic conflict to have in any of your stories. You could have people who see cybernetics and augmentations that allow them to be the person they've always wanted to be. Really express themselves and be who they are. And this is the transhumanistic part of it. Maybe they even want to transcend being a meat sack into something completely different. Versus naturalism, where the idea of naturalism in Cyberpunk is that because we are relying on technology so much and augmenting ourselves so much, that we are no longer what you would call human. That we lose our humanity along the way, and so we should reject these things and slow down any technological progress. As you can see, this is a really, really good conflict, especially if, like, characters in a story, especially the main characters in the story, have an opinion about these things, because I think that creates like just such a beautiful discussion. And also, when you blend the transhumanism versus naturalism with communal individualism and corporate individualism, you can actually have some really cool and interesting characters. What if you have a naturalistic corporate individual, right? While you have a transhumanistic communal individual. Isn't that cool? Like, you can kind of mix it up and swap it around and create different philosophies for different characters. And yeah, other than that, the last thing that I have is the philosophy of technology itself. Technology use in itself, apart from the naturalistic versus the transhumanism arguments, is where Cyberpunk really functions not as a technology scary, but more of who's owning the technology and where does it go, right? In something like Star Trek, technology is used to, well, ingratiate all. Yes, we have replicators and warp drives and things like that, and they're given out freely, and it ends poverty and war and all this stuff. Cyberpunk, on the other hand, says that if these technologies are advanced, well, there's going to be a subscription, there's going to be a high price range and all that jazz, because somebody's going to want to make a profit off of that. So Cyberpunk is not afraid of this new technology coming in. It's actually saying, okay, who owns the technology? Why is it being distributed in this way? And is acceleration of technological advancements without that willingness to be, well, let's say human or kind or empathetic, a good thing? So yeah, those are my personal philosophies on Cyberpunk. Again, communal individualism versus corporate individualism, transhumanism versus naturalism, and then of course, at the end of the day, who is responsible for the advancement of technology and who has access to said technologies and why. Bam! A lot of stuff that I chew on almost every day. And hey, what are your philosophies of Cyberpunk? Do you think there are more things that I've of course missed because I haven't covered everything? But what are your philosophies of Cyberpunk? What makes you like Cyberpunk as a genre? And what kind of stories do you want to see more of in Cyberpunk itself? And bring up more philosophical ideas. So, I hope you guys really like this video, and I hope I didn't ramble on too long. But I want you guys to also think about these things and give me your answers. Disagree with me, honestly, it's fine. I'm not very smart, y'all. But yeah, I hope you guys have a good day. Go out there, play some games, run some games, and I'll see you next time. Peace.